everybody. My name is Jen Battles, and I am entering my 5th year as co-director for Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. I've worked for nearly 20 years in the nonprofit sector, pursuing missions to empower veterans, unhoused populations, people living with disabilities, and survivors of violence.
I'm Katie Fayad, and I joined the DSVS team about 3 years ago as the Communications and Outreach Coordinator. Before coming to DSVS, I owned a yoga studio in New York City, and my background's in marketing. When COVID hit, we had to move my whole business online, and that's when I learned how powerful stories are in keeping community together.
Hi, my name is Jen Sprague, and I participated in the very first DSVS advocate training back in 2005. And since then, I've worked the helpline, I've assisted with publications and fundraisers and websites. I'm a freelance screenwriter with 2 produced movie credits, and I have been obsessed with story structure for the past few years.
I had never worked in the nonprofit world before with survivors. And when I was hired, one of the first things that I noticed was our website, in particular, the survivor stories that we were sharing on the website. They needed to be reworked. But how? We didn't know. I am not a writer. And that's where Jen came in to come and help us.
So I prepared 3 2-hour sessions focused on reworking the existing DSVS narratives using story structure tools and timelines known to most screenwriters. During those meetings, we made adaptations and we shifted the models to better represent the lived experience of a survivor.
And the sessions gave me the confidence to approach the narratives differently, to honor the survivors, not just for the difficult things they endured, but as whole people with hopes, dreams, and full lives. If this training could give me the confidence to be able to do this work, then I believe it can give you the confidence as well.
And that's part of the point here is we wanted to make these ideas and these models available to other nonprofits to adapt for their own causes. In these sessions, though, we're using language and examples particular to DSVS and to the anti-violence movement. We do so with the expectation that being detailed and specific in our own case will better prepare all of you to translate these skills for your own use. All narratives should change the names of clients to protect individual privacy and to demonstrate the organization's commitment to confidentiality.
Living in a small rural community, we go a step further. If we were to use the exact details of a survivor's story, the person involved would be easily identified. So even with fictitious names. So we create composite narratives. All of the incidents and experiences described are true. They all just didn't happen to one person.
An added benefit of composites is we can shape the stories. So they do as much work as possible to highlight the organization's mission and services. Each narrative is presented with a disclaimer that names have been changed, but we're not stating that it's a composite just because we don't want people to create any doubt in their minds or think, oh, they had to make this up, so they had something sensational.
Right. Our goal is to show true patterns of common family violence and not the most extreme examples. So with 1 in 3 Montanans experiencing interpersonal violence at some point in their lives, the stories need to reflect the conditions and the experiences that most survivors face. It's important that organizations serving marginalized communities understand and recognize their power and how they choose to portray the people they exist to support. We have a responsibility to use our platforms and our social standing with care, recognizing that stories have the ability to elevate and empower, but also to reinforce stereotypes and cause real harm. We use narratives as communication tools to evoke feeling, to teach, to illustrate impact. We use stories to describe services, to showcase alliances we have with other safe entities in the community, and we also use them to illustrate what survivor advocacy actually looks like. Our stories explain the impact of donations and address myths about who experiences interpersonal violence. We also use narratives to motivate readers and help them see themselves in the survivor story. It might be a good idea for you to pause for a minute here and think about your own organization and what you're trying to accomplish with your own narratives.
Books, movies, and TV shows create a straight, logical, satisfying path from beginning to end. The main character forms a goal and achieves it by the end of the story. This isn't, of course, the way real life happens. Because we've become so accustomed to this pattern in stories, it can be difficult for the public to sympathize when there is no straight plot line, no clearly defined goal, and a main character who is complicated, flawed, and overwhelmed. It also makes it difficult for a survivor who is struggling to have empathy for themselves when that's their model for how a story is supposed to unfold. Survivors of trauma often struggle with the well-intentioned misunderstanding of their family and friends, people who want a story that makes sense to them. And this is one of the ways that I believe story structure can and does do harm. We're conditioned to expect stories in which intelligence, loyalty, and kindness are rewarded, stories where justice prevails. And when this doesn't happen, rather than considering that our individual worldview might be wrong, we look for somewhere to put the blame. Unfortunately, the blame is often placed on the survivor. So poorly structured narratives might offer an oversimplified path from harm done to organization provides services and happy, healthy safety achieved. Any survivor's path is complicated with setbacks, social pressures, circumstances outside the survivor's control, delays, and indecision. So a story told in a mediocre way at best is a missed opportunity to educate the public on the mission of your organization, and at worst it may reinforce problematic stereotypes that exist in your field.
We are a storytelling species. For as long as humans have gathered together, stories have been how we make sense of the world. We could share the numbers, the clients sheltered, the calls answered, and those numbers matter. But studies show that stories do something that numbers can't. They spark empathy. Imagine instead a story of a mother and her children arriving in an emergency shelter. Describe them sharing a meal, watching a movie, resting together, safe and free from fear. That image moves hearts in a way that statistics never will. A single story can reveal the true impact of our work. It brings to life the immeasurable benefits of our services: hope, trust, resilience, and empowerment. And when we tell these stories, we also shape the language around our mission. We choose words that affirm dignity, using words like survivor instead of victim. What I would like to share through these stories is that the violence that happens in relationships does not define someone. Survivors are people, before, during, and after those experiences. They represent the truth that no one is immune to relationship violence, and at the same time, they embody resilience and humanity.
We're starting off with character roles. This might feel rudimentary, and most of the roles are ones you already know. But given how short narratives are, it's important that each person you include in the narrative is there for a reason. Stories typically have three main characters: the protagonist, B-protagonist, and mentor. The two protagonists have separate goals, and those goals drive the plot. The role of the mentor is to assist the protagonist. And lots of stories will combine the B-protagonist and the mentor into one character. Allies and antagonists are pretty straightforward. They're secondary characters that will either help or hinder the protagonist. The rescue character is temporarily powerless sometime during the story, and another character has to save them. And this is the character role that really inspired us to rework our narratives. Survivors are often depicted as helpless rescue characters with no agency or goals of their own. And the organization was the hero who saved them. And that's clearly problematic for all the reasons we've previously discussed. The advocate character is different from the mentor. A mentor needs to question and challenge the protagonist, help them learn their life lessons, and confront their weaknesses. The advocate, on the other hand, is unconditional in their support. They're always nurturing and affirming.
We'll be using the Pixar movie Finding Nemo as an example throughout this series. Most everyone has seen it, and its structure is easy to deconstruct and identify. So the protagonist in this movie is Marlin. The movie centers on his motivation to find his son Nemo. Marlin is a loving but overprotective father. He needs to learn to trust Nemo and the world in general. The protagonist is Nemo. Nemo is a curious but sheltered only child of Marlin. His goal is to escape the fish tank. Nemo needs to learn to trust himself. The mentor is Dory. Dory does not have her own goal, but assists Marlin in finding Nemo. She helps Marlin learn how to trust.
So Finding Nemo is a reunion plotline. Marlin and Nemo are separated early on, and the film switches back and forth between the two characters. So Marlin and Nemo each have their own set of allies and antagonists. Marlin and Dory meet several allies who help by giving directions, acting as role models, making connections, or providing transportation. So for Nemo's allies, Gil and the Tank Gang act as allies for Nemo by initiating him into their gang, encouraging him to trust his abilities, and helping him to escape the fish tank. Nigel the Pelican is a connector ally, bringing news from the outside world to the Tank Gang.
Marlin and Dory face a series of antagonists as they move through the ocean. These antagonists are a threat only because their goal is to stay alive. So they are either protecting themselves or looking to eat fish for sustenance. Nemo's antagonist, the dentist, had a great intention. He thought Nemo couldn't survive in the wild by himself, so he brought him into the tank. The dentist's actions created trauma for Marlin and Nemo, though. Darla is portrayed as this careless, unaware character. She shakes the bags that fish are in and unintentionally kills them. Rescue characters. Each of the characters in this movie is temporarily placed in this position at different times. Marlin believes that Nemo is a rescue character who can't survive without his protection. Dory is incapacitated by the jellyfish stings and has to be rescued by Marlin. Dory and Marlin are both then saved by the turtles. Nigel the Pelican saves Dory and Marlin from the seagulls. Near the end of the story, Nemo saves Dory from the fishing net. Throughout Finding Nemo, different characters are placed in the temporary position of needing to be rescued. But no character is completely passive and helpless and always needing to be saved by others. Advocate. This is Mr. Ray the teacher. Mr. Ray believes Nemo is ready for school and can be safe in his care, who treats all of his students with equal respect as future scientists and sea explorers.
So a couple of thoughts about Finding Nemo before we move on. One inspiring aspect of this film is that both Nemo and Dory have disabilities. Nemo has an undersized fin, and Dory suffers from short-term memory loss. But neither character is defined by their disability. Their roles in the story are centered on their positive qualities: courageousness, friendliness, being trusting, kind, and capable.
So Marlin is the protagonist in this story, but for many people, he isn't the most memorable character. Most people are drawn to either Nemo or Dory. So while the character role is important, it's the complexity, the likability, and the relatability of the character that counts.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the meat of this. I'm about to read a sample narrative. This is before we did any revisions with Jen. And I think this part's really important because I feel like nonprofits do a poor job of describing how getting to success starts with a lot of failure. So this narrative is pretty cringy, but it also was kind of cutting edge 15 years ago when we first wrote it, and it was on our website for a lot of years. And so I think it's important to start there. Our original narrative starts with Laura. After a brutal assault that left Laura with extensive injuries to her eye socket and a missing tooth, Laura fled to a neighbor who took her to the emergency room. The sheriff's office was called, but fearing for her life, Laura refused to make a report or even meet with officers. The deputy left her friend with our contact information, and she called the helpline. DSVS was able to place Laura and her 6-year-old daughter, Lexi, in an emergency shelter overnight. The next day, when she came to meet with our direct services advocate, her bruised eye was the size of a baseball, swollen and closed. Together, they discussed safety planning and some options for Laura to consider. She'd been living with violence throughout her 15-year marriage. According to Laura, her husband had a looping pattern of losing jobs, alcohol abuse, and physical violence. The previous night's assault was the worst that it had ever been, and Laura decided she needed to leave for her and Lexi's safety. DSVS continued to provide shelter for Lexi and Laura until they could move in temporarily with Laura's adult son, but the battle was far from over. While in shelter, Laura's tooth that was knocked out during the assault became infected and she had to have emergency surgery. Laura also discovered that her husband had canceled their health insurance the month before. DSVS was able to pay for the emergency surgery and cover part of the cost of a retainer she needed to wear for a year. Laura quickly found a rental for her and Lexi, and DSVS paid for her security deposit as well as a couple months of rent. Laura faces a huge stack of medical bills, which resulted from the assault, as well as a mountain of debt accumulated during her marriage. However, without her husband controlling her, Laura has been able to take on more work and has a plan to pay her debts. She's started a process for divorce and is developing a parenting plan. But her husband calls her frequently to tell her that he won't allow it. Fortunately for Laura, he can't stop the process. It's going to take time, likely longer than most divorces. Lexi has struggled with the transition, and Laura has needed a lot of reassurance that she's making the right decision for her and her daughter. Laura's fight is long from over, but every time she comes into the office, she looks healthier and smiles with a little more ease. We believe in her, and we know that this isn't the end of her story.
See, in this original narrative, the character roles that we see, the protagonist is Laura, the rescue character is Lexi, the B protagonist is DSVS, the mentor is also DSVS and the direct services advocate. Allies are the neighbor, deputy, and Laura's adult son, and the antagonist is the husband.
So I'm sure you might have noticed, but there's obviously some problems with the original narrative. First of all, it begins with the physical assault. So the missed opportunity here is a chance to establish the protagonist's life pre-trauma, show that the relationship didn't begin with violence, and demonstrate the dynamic of power and control in the relationship. The second issue we saw was that the protagonist has no agency. There wasn't a chance to show the protagonist as an individual with a personality, with desires and strengths. We also missed an opportunity to define obstacles to receiving services, especially in our area, in our rural place. There are lots of barriers to leaving a relationship like this, and we didn't have an opportunity to talk about those in the story. We also didn't highlight the decisions the protagonist makes for their own life and safety, and we need to show that survivors are the experts in their own safety. The story also reinforces stereotypes of class and abusive partners. The story misses an opportunity to show that domestic violence occurs across all socioeconomic levels, and it misses an opportunity to demonstrate the duality of a perpetrator who isolates abuse in the home. So, for example, he might be very charismatic in public and abusive in private.
So obviously we didn't fit all of those things into Laura's story, but there's several narratives that DSVS uses in newsletters, on their website, in grant proposals, and we were compiling a list of different issues that could go into narratives. So I'm going to read our revised narrative that Katie and I worked on. It took us several drafts to get to this one. We wanted it to be around the same word count, and we wanted it to feel like a story, and we wanted to have some personality and some tone. And I think that Katie did a great job with those things. Laura's story, revised narrative. Laura lived with confidence and easy laughs, surrounded by friends and a caring family. She was completing online courses toward earning her CNA certification, and her future hummed with potential. Still, beneath her brightness lived the quiet fear of being alone, of never getting married. When a friend introduced her to Jack, Laura held a tender hope. Perhaps this man would be the one. Jack was consuming, flattering, intoxicating. Laura had never felt so cared for. 6 months later, she said yes to his proposal, not just to the man, but to the promise of being cherished, protected. She felt lucky and was excited to start their life together. But Jack began to quiz her on time she spent away from him. One night, after visiting her mother, Laura and Jack argued. He said she was ignoring him, taking him for granted. His anger and frustration boiled over. He slapped her face, hard. The next morning, Jack wept and begged for forgiveness. He didn't know what came over him. He talked about his childhood and his fear of abandonment. Laura loved him and wanted the marriage to work. She told no one. 10 years passed. They bought a house, got a dog, had a daughter, Lexi, now 6 years old. Laura lived in constant watchfulness, tailoring her behavior to pacify Jack, to guard Lexi from the violence that had become routine. Laura had slowly become isolated from her friends and family, too ashamed for them to know what her life had become. One day, Lexi had a high fever, and Laura forgot to make dinner. Jack erupted. He dragged Laura from Lexi's room and berated her. Laura tried to de-escalate, but he struck her in the face. Her mouth filled with blood, her eyes swelled immediately. Laura gathered Lexi up and ran to the neighbor's house. The police were called, but Laura declined to press charges, afraid of Jack's retaliation. The officer gave her the DSVS helpline number. Laura called the next day. Laura met with a DSVS advocate, and together they created a safety plan. Within days, Laura and Lexi were in long-term shelter. Within weeks, they had a home. Deposit paid, rent covered, surgery scheduled for her infected tooth. And for the first time in years, Laura had the chance to breathe. With time, she realized how thoroughly she had guarded the secret of Jack's violence, afraid of judgment, of being seen as weak, wrong, or stupid. But her family and friends folded her and Lexi back in their lives with open arms. Laura's rebuilding, relearning, reclaiming. She has a job, is getting a divorce. Jack still calls. He threatens, pleads, promises, but Laura protects her boundaries. Each time she visits DSVS, her advocate notices the change. Laura's smile is easy. She's grounded, her confidence returning.
There are many changes that we made to this narrative, and through the course of these 2 videos, we'll walk you through each decision that we made and the tools and the timelines that we used to make them. The first thing to point out is that the character roles are the same. Laura is still the protagonist, but now she's more fleshed out and is the hero of her own story. DSVS remains a strong presence as the mentor and the B protagonist, and the services offered are still a main focus.
We're going to move on now to character motivations. A character should have 2 overall motivations, one external and one internal. The external motivation moves the plot forward and the action, and the internal motivation is what creates the character's emotional arc. External motivation, this is an objective, measurable, yes or no goal. It's something that clearly either happens or doesn't happen. And it's something that the reader should be able to visualize. And there's 2 main types. It's either one big single focused goal, like getting to a place or finding a thing, or it is a day-to-day ongoing goal, like staying alive, keeping your job, protecting your kids. It's important to mention that an external motivation can be abandoned or adapted, and that usually happens towards the end of a story. The internal motivation is a subjective goal that defines a character's emotional arc. It can't be objectively measured. It might be conscious or unconscious, and it's one of the following types. It could be a necessary emotional change, learning to trust, learning to be more confident, a change in their social standing, to be more popular, to be in a relationship, the integration of two identities. This is typically used when we have someone with a hidden identity and they're coming out and integrating those two. The righting of a wrong, so some form of vengeance, or finally, an act of restoration or protection.
Let's go back to Finding Nemo for some examples. So again, Marlin is a protagonist in the movie. His external motivation is to find Nemo. The type of motivation is single, focus. His internal motivation is to learn to trust Nemo, learn to trust the world in general. So the type of motivation is necessary emotional change. He's not aware that he needs to learn how to trust, so it's an unconscious motivation. The B protagonist, again, is Nemo. His external motivation is to escape the fish tank. The type of motivation is a single focus. His internal motivation is to learn how to trust himself. The type of motivation is necessary emotional change, which is conscious. The mentor is Dory. Her external motivation is to help Marlin find Nemo. Dory assists Marlin with each problem, so her emphasis is on helping Marlin. Her internal motivation is to find something that feels like home. The type of motivation is a change in social standing, which is unconscious.
So with the two versions of Laura's narrative, the external motivations are the same. Laura wants to find a new place for herself and her daughter to live, which is a single focus motivation. The B protagonist mentor is DSVS. They want to provide services. That's ongoing. And the husband wants to keep his family together. Again, this is an ongoing type of external motivation. Notice that the antagonist external motivation here sounds reasonable. He wants to keep his family together. It is how he goes about this, and his complete denial of his behavior and of Laura's needs and wishes, that's what makes it antagonistic. Everyone believes that they are the hero of the story, and that's the thing to remember when you're writing an antagonist.
One of the common internal motivations in media stories is the necessary emotional change. Learn to trust, be confident, be brave. Essentially, a character has to confront their own weakness before they can achieve their external motivation. We decided that this type of internal motivation would be hugely problematic because it blames the survivor. If you'd only believe in yourself and trusted your intuition or been smarter, then this wouldn't have happened to you. So we aren't going to use necessary emotional change in a client narrative. So the narrative internal motivations, our protagonist Laura wants to protect her daughter, and this type of internal motivation is an act of protection, and it's conscious. The internal motivation of the B protagonist and the mentor, DSVS, is to provide services for Laura and Lexi. This is the righting of a wrong through reparations and is conscious. The internal motivation of the antagonist, the husband, is to control the relationship. Initially, this is an act of protection, but then it's an act of restoration and is conscious.
Defining character roles for the people in your narrative and then assigning them external or internal motivations will help focus the story. These two ideas are the groundwork for our next session, the hero's journey. We'll discuss a timeline template that will give your narrative a recognizable and relatable plotline.
We're going to film for like 45 minutes and have 30 seconds of material.